Welcome, everybody. A few more people might pop in. We'll see. This is the follow-up discussion session to the mini conference on creative mimesis and gentle action, the practice of gentle action that we had a couple of weeks ago. And I realized that it's possible that not everybody that's here was at the mini conference. So I'm going to do a really quick recap for those who weren't there, and even for those that were. We'll spend the first few minutes doing that. And so I'll give a little definition of gentle action and creative mimesis. So these are some of the things that we said. Gentle action is not a technique only, but a way of life. It can also be a social and political strategy. It's not something exotic or unusual, but already all around us, like examples of loving or creative mimesis. We just have to name what is going on to participate more fully in it. Gentle action has a lot to do with the Christian and other contemplative traditions of mindfulness, letting go, letting be, and the non-coercion of Wu Wei and Taoism. It's not about passivity, but attunement to deeper patterns. So it's about getting in touch with the whole rather than trying to impose action on an organization or situation from the outside, trying to get in touch with the whole first. So I was going to give a couple of examples of gentle action. We didn't really talk about these in the mini conference, but I found some interesting ones. One of them was the reintroduction of wolves in Yellowstone Park. When they did that, something unusual happened they weren't expecting, which is that other species and the entire ecosystem rebalanced themselves. And eventually it even changed the course of the rivers because of the way that animals fed on the banks of the rivers. Another interesting example is the Sunday school movement, which started with one man in 1780s England who had a vision to use Sunday morning to educate poor children. And that led to universal public education all around the world. Another one that happened just really close to where I'm living right now, there was a woman named Dr. June McCarroll who almost had an accident on the road when cars were new in 1917. And so she hand painted a center line on a road in Indio, California, and started a letter writing campaign. And that, of course, grew to become the global standard. So those are some examples of gentle action, small actions that take on disproportionate amounts of, that work disproportionately well. So let me also review what creative mimesis is. We talked about this a little bit. I define creative mimesis as imitating a model whose active desire for us and lack of rivalry opens up a space for both of us to have a future, creating a larger emergent place from which to see and act. And that's what I mean by desiring the subjectivity of self and other. The model desires the other as a subject and not as an object. And there's mutual imitation and creative contagion. It's always about the self and the other. So we talked about that. And then I also did a little comparison between creative mimesis and gentle action, showing how they seem to be talking about the same process. So in both cases, there's a process that starts with an organization in need of solutions or a situation or a relationship of some kind. And we have an act of creative suspension, which is what David Pete calls it in gentle action. And Rene Girard calls it creative renunciation. He has that as a first step, where there is a withdrawal from judgment and the temptation to fix the situation or enter into rivalry. So it's a withdrawal action. Now, Girard has that part. Now, the next part is the part where gentle action can help us see how loving mimesis works. Participants get into a state where they can perceive the whole, which is gentle action, or perceive self and others being in the same field of meaning through loving and creative mimetic desire. So you get into the same, you get into a presence, a state of presence with self and other. A new dynamic and state of affairs begins to emerge, which is creative and which can escalate to definitive actions appropriate to the situation, which is gentle action. And I would say that this is probably the opposite of generative scapegoating. So actions might be disproportionately small in relation to the major effects they have. That's a gentle action principle, creating new social realities. Now, that's in contrast to Girard's myth, ritual, and taboo, which create social realities, but they do that based upon misapprehension or lie. So this is an encounter with presence and the real through creative mimesis. So gentle action has a lot to do with presence and groundedness. And it works at all levels, meaning it could be between you and me, it could be between a group of people relationally, and it could be at the level of nations or global realities. David Pete believed that gentle action could work in very large scale environmental issues, for instance, or at the level of bureaucracies or things like that. Okay, so what we're going to do, but that's the little recap. I'm going to just very briefly reintroduce the speakers. Vern Redekop is away on vacation right now, but we have Robin Collins and Felicity McCallum with us again. Each one of them is going to speak for about 7 or 8 minutes, just a really quick little elaboration of some things that they didn't get a chance to say at the mini conference, and that'll prime us for discussion. Again, helping jar our memories. And so I'm going to introduce Robin right now. Robin is my spouse. He's a philosopher at Messiah University in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, and his specialty is philosophy of science. So, and he's been there 35 years, so.
So, okay, thank you again. And Rebecca wanted me to elaborate on some details. I'm actually do much more than philosophy of science. I do philosophy of physics. I do, and really the intersection between philosophy, theology, and philosophy religion, or philosophy of science, theology, and philosophy religion. So I have strong backgrounds in both science and philosophy religion. I do some philosophical theology. So last time, I talked about a kind of I started with talking about two different kinds of orientations towards the world, more correlated with the left brain, and an orientation correlated with the right brain. And the right brain, what's characteristic of right brain orientation is sort of presence to the world, and it's more holistic. And what's correlated with the left brain, a kind of orientation towards the world, is a representation of reality and kind of cognitive control and symbolizing reality. Now, and then I connected that with mimesis and loving mimesis, which I said with the left brain kind tends towards rivalry because it wants control, and it tries to give a kind of cognitive control of the other, re-symbolizes it, and it tries to get being from the other, whereas a more right brain approach is, because it's about presence, it's present to the other. It's sort of being present to their being and allowing their being to participate, to sort of as a participation occurs with their being, and so an affirmation of their being. So that was the first thing I talked about. And then I had connected this with the idea of Rupert Sheldrake of morphic fields. And morphic fields, Rupert Sheldrake is a biologist and a very innovative biologist. And he's developed this concept of morphic fields, which means morphic means form. So it's pattern forming fields. You can think of them as information fields that, for example, in the growth of an organism, the morphic field would be the information about the three-dimensional structure, like of your body, that would guide the cells and how they differentiate. But he sees them as being much larger, these sort of fields, than that. These fields also connect. The more close a species is, the more, or another group is to individual group, the more they're morphically connected. In other words, the more the one can non-locally influence the other. So his classic example is these rat experiments where the rats learn a maze in the United States, let's say, and since Felicity's in Australia, he uses that as an example. The rats in Australia are able to more quickly learn that maze. So it's like they're picking up information. Another case is that there's a kind of, seems to be, he would give an example of homing pigeons morphically connected with where they were raised. So that's why if you move them a long ways away, they almost miraculously find their way back. It's really, really a mystery of how they do that. But he claims that's a kind of morphic connection. And you see the same thing with monarch butterflies and sea turtles that are able to do this. So, and then I talked about how that's relevant. And I want to particularly focus on the ideas like when we're engaging with the world and other people, how that kind of fits together. So I linked it up with atonement, and one of the in my work on atonement, the idea is that Jesus changed the human morphic field. So instead of the old Adamic morphic field, it's about him facing his own vulnerability, facing human vulnerability on the cross, while at the same time, and in the worst of the human life situation, where the cross was designed to make people, humiliate people, was perfected for that reason. And in that circumstance, he acted in perfect faith, hope, and love towards, even though he experienced alienation from God and each other. The alienation of God is, why, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And then that's a new morphic field that then we can tap into. And he becomes the kind of template morphic field. Then as we tap into it, that enables us to act in faith, hope, and love. And that acting in faith, hope, and love, then when we act in that, we also contribute to the morphic field. And so you get this in Paul saying in what otherwise would seem puzzling in Colossians 1:24, he says, I'm completing Christ's suffering in my own body. So when we act in a positive way, it's not just localized, the effects are much larger. Every act we do, even if it's isolated in this idea, changes the morphic field. And then if you did Rupert Sheldrake's idea of it, the closer one is to your life situation, let's say somebody else, so you forgive in a particularly, let's say you get racially discriminated against and you forgive, that makes it, or you have a disability and you forgive, that makes it easier for another person in a similar circumstance to forgive. Just like the rats who are in the similar maze, it makes it easier for them to do the maze. So that's it, I call us little repeater towers that modify and kind of increase the information field, fill it out. So each of us has a role to play. And then, so the positive mind, that would be an example of positive creative desire, which we're by participating in Christ. And then we make, it's not only transmitted from just external imitation, but even when we engage in that just on our own thinking and we're isolated from other people, that ends up having, loving thoughts end up having an effect.
So next we're going to have Dr. Felicity McCallum speak for 7 or 8 minutes, and she will again take up her questions of how gentle action and creative mimesis resonate with an indigenous worldview or practices. And you got a little bit of time to talk about that, Felicity, but I felt like you needed more. So we're going to have about 7 or 8 minutes. Let me introduce Felicity. She's a lecturer at Charles Sturt University in theology and Australian history through the Center for Christianity and Culture. She's a leading voice on Indigenous issues and Christianity in Australia. And she's also an adjunct at Australian Catholic University. So Felicity, welcome.
Thank you. It's beautiful to be here. And I should correct it that I'm actually an adjunct at CSU and lecturer at the Catholic University.
I got it. I got it mixed up.
That's
Sorry.
Okay. No. It's all good. It's all good. I'd just like to begin by acknowledging country. I'll do that in our language, which is Bo Wayika Kakiliko Awabakal. And in announcing through the language of the country, there's a way that we are affirming and healing the country. So the language being at least 11,800 years old in these parts of the continent of Australia, the language is an important transmission and holding of the whole space here. So today, I'm an Awabakal woman, so part of my heritage is from this part of the continent of Australia. And so today, in reference to our conference, I'm looking at the way that our embodiment of our indigeneity is an expression of gentle action. And I'm also looking at the modelling socially that our First Peoples of Australia and around the world are for positive mimesis going forward. So I've prepared just a few little slides just as a focal point really to get a connection with the message of this embodiment and what the oneness of indigeneity and the Indigenous lens offers. So I'm just going to share my screen. There we go. And I'll just start that off. Let me see if I can get the slideshow to begin. So in the southeastern part of Australia, the totem is the wedged-tailed eagle. And when we talk about a totem, we're talking about a relationship that is imitative in that we are engaged in a protective sense and also a sense where we derive a sense who we are, our identity from this part of creation. And in that imitation, we're synergizing with the actual energy and the strengths and the skills of that part, this beautiful part of our creative circle. So when I place the image of the wedge-tailed eagle here, I offer to you the sense of a panoramic view, of being able to engage with the thermal currents and be able to be attentive and also widely connected, which is what the wedge-tailed eagle is for all of creation, I suspect. So as an Indigenous person, connection and oneness is not something that you choose. It's just who you are. It's kind of like you just have a way of thinking and operating that even before being taught it, you just are, and this is something that people who are spiritually sensitive are equally. We just have a predisposition to be attentive to what people say is a fifth dimension. So it's not just what we see with our eyes, it's not just what we hear, it's actually that way that the heart sees and holds. And that oneness and connection is very, very important to the embodiment of gentle action. Because in reality, when we sit with a running stream or we're with a place of balance, which is what the environment gives us. And in Indigenous terms, we call this country. So our country, our water systems, we're actually being taught by the very tone, mood, and process of this environment about how to be in the world. And to engage, to hear that, requires our gentleness, and it also requires our humility in just being part of a larger contour, that my lifetime is not the big deal. I'm just one of, a big story of generational dance in this universe. And so I think that really reflects what Robin's saying to do with the way that we're not putting our own, we're not ordering things through our sense of order. This is very much a broader approach, a part of the brain that is very, very sort of deferent and respectful, deferential. So when we talk about the way that a butterfly's wings can affect the happenstance of one part of country to another part of the world, we're talking about that wisdom that, for example, Uncle Chris in Arrernte country in the middle of Australia said to me, when I touch a leaf, when you touch a leaf, Felicity, the stars feel it. And this very intricate understanding of the interface and the intimacy of all of creation gives us a sense of obligation, responsibility, and authority, because you just don't have any lack of confidence when you know what's going on in the actual earth around you, to be able to speak up and to do it in ways that are reflective and compassionate rather than forced or afraid, because you know you're connected. You know, it's like having an old friend who you'd have a cup of tea with, but you wouldn't force issues. The people that you bring to your yarning circle are going to be people that you gather with at a horizontal kind of style. So in a horizontal style. So just lastly, in terms of beliefs and practices, our practices that are anointed and ordained from Indigenous minds and Indigenous hearts have to do with reflecting the identity of nature and the way, the course of bringing connection, bringing oneness. Because when we yarn, for instance, and we're bringing ideas together in our conversations, we're not expressing ourselves as if we are the final authority. We are sharing in a circular fashion to be able to be models of humility and trust, that by being affirming of each other, that together in time the solutions will come forth. And they're not solutions that are taken as being self-adulating. They're solutions that emerge from a broader sense of wisdom. So I hope that helps in terms of just giving some insights about the long time, the right way approaches to being with the social construct, being aware of the very complex nature of engaging with our totem system, and being able to translate that through the language of our lives.
Well, Felicity, you just hit the timer just perfectly. That was great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, Myrna, you have your hand raised.
Well, I was just commenting that Felicity in your talk kind of did have a little overlap with the butterfly and the morphic field idea from, United States to Australia kind of thing, information. That was a similar thing. I just wanted to make a comment about. Also, Felicity, I wish I was a part of a practice where people sat around in a circle like that. Yeah, that. So that was more of a comment that you guys are probably drawing also, right, together as you present this information, that common overlap. That's probably intentional on your part with gentle action, but
Thank you, Myrna. They're beautiful observations. And it actually happens that the presentations were independently brought together. And so there is this kind of integration, I guess, that happens quite spontaneously in that desire to bring meaning forth in this space. And I think those symbols and imageries, they do make sense universally, don't they? It's beautiful.
The morphic field idea of filling out more information, I thought that was interesting.
I was just going to say the morphic field idea is we're more interconnected for like Rupert Sheldrake, and there seems to be other evidence for this. I've actually looked somewhat carefully at his evidence, and I think he's got quite good evidence for this kind of non-local interconnection. So it's a kind of information field that we're part of. And that could also explain why gentle action can work, because it's not just locally here, we're actually having a much larger effect. Andrew, yeah.
Yeah, I had a question for you, Robin, particularly because you mentioned having a background in science and physics, and I did a lot of my math teachers and physics teachers. We got a principle up front, the daily lesson, and diagrams on how to understand it, and then we were drilled on how to like practice it and do it. And it was very much principle first, practice it, and then maybe go back and review and expand a bit. But and I was curious if that didn't really fit with what, and I haven't read all of the book Gentle Action yet, but it didn't seem like that was exactly what a gentle action sort of like. You're not starting with the principle first. It seems like perhaps you're starting somewhere else. And I guess I was curious if you can comment on the possibility of gentle action in the classroom or as a pedagogic approach.
So it's in the classroom, it'd be being present to the students. So it be really good teachers, they can pick up on the students. So it's that right brain presence. Now, what you're talking about, the principles and drilling, that would be more characteristic of the left brain. And I don't want to scapegoat the left brain. That's very useful. The left brain is useful for testing. Some people have perceptions that aren't real. We often have fake perceptions. And it also scaffolding is that you have to learn a certain amount of material to even have the intuitive perception. So the learning in a kind of like you talked about by principles and then working things out, that allows you to see further. So a lot of the success of where we can see the scientific intuitions that make breakthroughs in science require a lot of groundwork, laying stuff of these kind of principles. So they kind of work together, the different modes of thought. But in the classroom, you're going to have to do both. They're going to have to understand those principles, and then the presence to the students, knowing when they're having difficulties, seeing that they're not understanding something, and just affirming them as people. Kind of loving mimesis is really important. In fact, I'm integrating AI into all my classes, and people wonder about what's the role of the professor in the future, where AI can do more than nuts and bolts, of drilling students and all that sort of thing. So what becomes even more important, I think, for the professor is modeling, a kind of modeling. I would say loving mimesis, the subjectivity of the students and oneself, and a sort of presence in the classroom, which you can't, you don't imitate a machine. Okay, so there's not that room. So does that help answer your question? Okay, so George Dunn is listed up here next.
Well, yeah, I found the discussion of Sheldrake to be interesting. I know a little bit about his ideas, and I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the jury is still out. But what's intriguing is, as modern science was born out of the elimination of two of the classical causes, right? Formal and final cause. And do you see Sheldrake's ideas as kind of enabling a recovery of formal cause and final cause? And if so, could this contribute to the re-enchantment of the mechanized world?
Yeah, I do think it contributes to the re-enchantment. And let me say, maybe in a little different way, first about the formal and final cause, I would actually deny that modern science eliminated formal cause, because formal cause, like if you look in physics, it's all about equations. It's all about mathematics, so that the world is mathematically structured. And that would be a formal kind of cause. It's the form of the world. So it's like you would explain something happening by writing down the equation, and it's the solution to this equation, and there's not like an efficient causal explanation for it. But on final cause, that does seem to be the case, that the explanation in terms of purposes is eliminated. I would see, I don't know, that's an interesting thought, whether that's a final cause or not, but I would see it as, here's taking what Ian McGilchrist says about this. What the left brain in the mechanical view is really, you represent it in all these symbols you can manipulate. So little particles moving around. And so it objectifies the world. And temp for kind of a cognitive control. And so it's abstraction in the bad sense is you're no longer participating in the world. The world's not present to you. It's represented to you in some model. And so people like Goethe and others in the Romantic movement, especially, and Coleridge, that's the kind of part they rejected. What this does is you go beyond a mere being present through the world symbolically through representing the world, but gives you a basis for being present in a more direct way to the physical world that you participate in it. And I think that's where you're going to get a re-enchantment. But I think that it's going to also circumvent some of the problems with the enchanted view, and that is the superstitious nature of it. And I think modern science did a good clearing out effect, and that was the left brain approach we had in abstractions and developing models. So I think that's one of the roles of this left brain kind of thinking, is testing the right brain, purported right brain perceptions, and then also scaffolding it. So I do think in that way it has the potential of re-enchanting the world, because I think that is about being alienated from the world, and it allows us to participate in the world in a deeper way. So that makes some sense?
Yeah, just real quick follow-up, if I may.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah, well, the idea of formal causes posits that the world consists of heterogeneous kinds, right? But the mathematical, mechanical picture of the world says all of these various kinds can be reduced to the same kind, that is, to something that can be expressed in mathematical equations. So I disagree with you when you say that sort of the modern world picture doesn't eliminate formal causes.
Well, I would think of formal causes as structuring principles, like the structure of something. And so, and the four causes as four modes of explanation. So like material cause, what would go into making something what it is. And the form is, you have the structuring principle, like, Aquinas thought the soul was the form of the body. And so it's what gives in modern terms, what gives mass energy its structure. And that would be expressed mathematically. So that's how I'm thinking. We might have a different way we're thinking of the formal cause. Aristotle had all those biological categories, the kind of fixed essences. But I'm thinking more broadly than Aristotle was thinking with that regard, because those essences don't fit everything that we want to talk about in terms of kind of structuring principles.
So Catherine has her hand up.
Okay, well, this one will be so easy. It's about the forgiveness part. I'm just kidding. It's not easy. That's why I want to ask. So, Robin, you talked about, I'm still kind of getting up on all these, the terminology and everything. But I understand when you say, the faith, hope, and love, when we act complete with Christ's suffering and change the morphic field, when we forgive, it makes it easier for to forgive and others to forgive. Except, there's been apologies in our culture recently, which to me seem to be impossible to make, and yet on a public stage, for in not an authentic, deep, not for me to judge, but it just doesn't seem to me to be possible to forgive someone for murdering your spouse. And so I can't help but think of that, because I'm living in Chicago, where, again, people are being detained and taken from the streets. My own colleagues and clients that my agency works with. And so this thing of forgiveness, I don't know. Yes, to be one, to resonate with Christ on the cross and my own sense of forgiveness, but the bigger reach, the bigger, I can't think of the word. And so there's something in that I need some help with, or clarity. And the same with Felicity, that it widely collected connection and oneness, the way our heart sees and holds. Yes, that so resonates with me. That's so beautiful and powerful. And yet the reality of where I'm living and what people are living through is such angst and heartache. And how do I bring all of this into applicability for living in these times? Does that make sense? I don't know.
Yeah, it makes some sense. I mean, and I'm not the expert on forgiveness here, but the idea would be is that we do have a kind of supernatural power, if you will, because what Jesus did, he made that kind of forgiveness possible. So would be extremely difficult. And I've never been put in a situation where I've had to exercise that kind of forgiveness. So I can't speak, I'm only speaking theoretically.
Yeah.
And not other people would have much deeper experience than this than me. But the idea is Jesus was in the worst of unjust persecution. Okay, truly innocent, as Gerard would emphasize, and yet he forgave. So from the worst unjust persecution, he forgave. That enables us, by participating in his new life of faith, hope, and love, for us to forgive. It doesn't mean forget. It doesn't mean try to work for change. And also part of his forgiveness was understanding that they were in the spiritual darkness. I think that also helps. He said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. It wasn't just, so it's seeing a lot of people's actions are out of ignorance, or I'd even say lower consciousness. If they really knew how to think, they really understood the value of other people and the value of their own self. I don't think you can understand the value of your own self without understanding the value of other people as being, that God values you and what God has called you to be, like shine like stars eventually and share in the life of God. I mean, I take that the ultimate Christian message is that we have the greatest possible gift, which is God's self, and we share in it the greatest possible way, which is being united with God. No longer I that live, in Christ that lives. So it's the greatest thing for us. That's our calling, but they don't even see that about themselves. So they're in a sort of darkness. Now, how willful that darkness is a question, and we can't address that. But I think so the two go along together.
Okay.
Understate, because he does say, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. And so understanding is part of that, to see them differently, not just label them as evil, but see them as if they only knew what you knew, they wouldn't be doing that.
Mm,
If they only recognized who Christ is, whose God's called us to be, they couldn't do that. So I would say in that kind of direction.
Thank you, Robin. And if I could just add that there is this difference, of course, between a performative kind of expression of forgiveness and the forgiveness that comes from the heart, which is where the conversion really is. And so when we talk about René Girard's mimetic theory, we're talking about who do we choose as a model to imitate. And even though our morphic field, for example, the milieu I'm living in at the moment, can be very caught up with violence, it's my choice, and this is what free will means, who I imitate, whose desire I imitate. So if I choose beyond this milieu to find a Jesus Christ or a Mother Teresa as my model, or my earlier leader, Biraban, then I am going to be emulating and embodying this in my progression towards forgiveness, which is a time experience too. It's not just an immediate thing. There's something about allowing the humility of right way, which takes time, can take generations.
wow. Thank you so much. Very helpful.
All right, thank you.